This video is brought to you by Incogni. Hi, welcome to another episode of ColdFusion. We all know a friend or family member who's been scammed. It's one of those events that can easily ruin someone's day. It's definitely worse than spilling coffee on your shirt or getting a flat tire. But these days, scams and frauds have escalated to a whole new level. We're not just talking about your run-of-the-mill schemes. Modern scammers are now elaborate conmen, disguising themselves as entrepreneurs, political dissidents, and even visionaries. Usually, to propagate the scam, the media reports on these characters, and investors absolutely lap it up. And before you know it, billions of dollars have disappeared into the pockets of these financial predators. Recently, the rate and scale of these scams has been staggering. Sam Bankman-Fried's FTX disaster was the most egregious example and dominated headlines last year. Then there's Charlie Javis, who defrauded one of the biggest banks in the world, JP Morgan, by selling them essentially a fake company. This next one's interesting. How about a TikTok trend that cheated the Australian government out of $4.6 billion? Or a political dissident who defrauded people through fake investment opportunities? Even one of the biggest video games of last year was a scam. Today, we'll take a look at all of this and more. We'll also have some exclusive segments with an interview with Stephen of the Coffeezilla YouTube channel. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into some of the most notorious frauds in the past 12 months.
You are watching ColdFusion TV.
First, let's start with two crypto-related frauds that shook the market last year. The FTX disaster is probably the most famous case on this list. It was a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme that involved a young billionaire, his ex-girlfriend, and a web of lies that collapsed in front of the entire world. It was a crazy case, and later we'll bring in Coffeezilla to give his perspectives on the case. The mastermind behind the fraud was Sam Bankman-Fried, an MIT graduate. In 2019, Sam launched FTX, a crypto exchange and hedge fund, and it soon became a hit with investors thanks to celebrity endorsements. Sam, at first glance, was a philanthropic, humble, but simple nerd who had stumbled into a lot of wealth. In reality, this was a carefully crafted image. Behind the scenes, FTX were a bunch of college kids. Sam's inner circle included his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, and some of his college buddies. Without rehashing the entire story, FTX funneled customer money for personal expenses and threw even more customer money into risky trades. These trades were carried out by a sister firm, Alameda Research, run by Caroline Ellison, who had next to no experience. Unfortunately for FTX, Alameda lost the customers' money. However, Sam continued to put on a brave face and was still doing interviews, and the media loved him. Then in November 2022, news broke that FTX's books contained a large number of tokens backed by nothing, made out of thin air. FTX customers panicked and they wanted their money back, but it had all been lost in bad trades. So when people tried to get their money out, withdrawals failed and FTX collapsed. While under investigation from US authorities, Sam couldn't resist being in the spotlight. He was caught multiple times lying and trying to weasel his way out of hard questions by Coffeezilla.
Thanks.
Yeah, just people, I'm just talking about people just, putting Bitcoin on the exchange.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was really clear terms of service around that. If it's true that you didn't invest client assets, not even in treasuries, as you said via a now deleted tweet, why do those client assets no longer exist?
So I just want to respond to that. And please, I completely respect your question, but you have monopolized all of these discussions, Coffeezilla. You need to let others speak and you need to respond to what I'm saying and not grandstand as much here. I completely understand where you're coming from. But to answer your question, I didn't make a decision there. I just processed withdrawals as we normally do until it became clear we couldn't anymore, at which point we shut them off. And it was the case that, at that point, there was a big liquidity hole. That's what happened. If you want to judge that process and think that we should have been spending those days frantically trying to code up a new withdrawal process, I disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fine. I mean, it's not about coding up a new withdrawal process. It's about treating your client assets the way you told them they'd be treated, right? It's a very different thing completely. But anyways, I'll stop grandstanding for Sam. Thanks, guys. Oh my gosh.
These media appearances were some of the evidence that was brought against him in court. As the investigation continued, it was a media circus, and as the case exploded into news headlines, the truth came out. FTX was barely a company. There was no record keeping or risk management. These university graduates did basically whatever they wanted. In the end, authorities would charge Sam with stealing at least $10 billion from FTX customers. And of course came the questions. How could such a thing happen? Where were the regulators? It was a real slap in the face to US regulators, and it looked like the systems that were in place to keep us safe had completely failed. I asked Stephen about his experience with the American government trying to grapple with crypto scams.
Just commenting on the hilarity, because this has happened to me before. Okay, I'll anonymize it. A senator's aide reached out to me, like legitimately. They're like, "What do we do with crypto? How do we like?" They literally asked me this question, and I was thinking to myself, "Isn't that your job? Why are you asking me? What are you talking about? Why are you outsourcing your job to me? I don't know. That's what you think about all day. Why are you asking me? I'm a YouTuber."
Sam's trial began in October of 2023, and it was a shocker. Caroline, his ex-girlfriend, squealed against Sam, and Stephen was in the courtroom at the time.
Court at that time when, you'd talk to this guy, you'd ambushed him twice on Clubhouse, he was squirreling away, and just seeing him implicate himself in all of these interviews, and some of those were yours. How did it feel to be there at that time watching him go down?
It was a surreal moment. It was, it felt really gratifying from the position of, I don't enjoy, just seeing people suffer needlessly by any means, but there is this frustration that grows over time where you cover these stories and nothing happens, right? And people get away with it. And the consequences of that is more scammers are hurting people. And so really there's a human cost on the other side that's sort of invisible because they don't have a voice. You don't really see them. And so it felt like a real satisfying thing in that this guy, at least one guy, is sort of actually getting tried. He's getting the chance to make his arguments. He has terrible arguments. So he's going to, he eventually got charged guilty on all counts. And so that was really satisfying. And to know we had a small part of that, and I do think it was small, was incredible. I mean, I think, that's where I find this work is the most meaningful. And, it's not just in the reporting, it's really seeing things happen after that is actually what I'm grateful for. So I'm grateful for all the people, all the lawyers who worked on that case to bring him down, all the people who contributed, all the other reporters who did really good reporting, some before me, and yeah.
The jury found SBF guilty on all counts, and he faces a potential 115-year jail term. Sentencing is scheduled for March 2024.
There's a saying meme traders like, and that is to the moon. Well, some loved it so much they made a cryptocurrency that was called Safemoon. You can see it here. It was simple.
Now let's move on to another crypto-related fraud case that also made headlines in 2023. This one is quite different from the FTX disaster. Launched in March 2021, Safemoon was a crypto project with an eyebrow-raising premise. The price was guaranteed to go, quote, safely to the moon. The idea was that it locked investor funds into a liquidity pool. How, might you ask? Well, there's this system that puts a 10% fee on every transaction. The money from the fees are split equally between the users, and the other half is locked safely away in a so-called liquidity pool. The only thing is that this pool had a leak straight into the pockets of the creators of the scam. They basically had backdoor access to the very funds that everyone thought was safe. The scam was exposed by the SEC and the Department of Justice, who charged the top executives of Safemoon with fraud, alleging that they withdrew more than $200 million from the project just as it went down. Expenses such as luxury cars and homes were the destination of all their customers' hard-earned money. So how did people fall for it? To ensure that people thought that the investments were safe, Safemoon paid celebrities and YouTubers to promote their token on social media, and they did this without disclosing their financial relationship or the risks involved. These celebrities then sold their tokens gradually, making profits while leaving the investors with worthless tokens. The price started to fall when people realized that this safe liquidity pool wasn't actually secure at all. The Safemoon executive team consisted of the creator, Kyle Nagy, CEO, John Carney, and CTO, Thomas Smith. Kyle remains at large, while John and Thomas have been arrested by the Department of Justice. They're facing charges of conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. It wasn't just the online landscape that was rocked by fraud. The corporate world was also witnessing a moral rot. And now we come to the scandals and fraud cases that rocked the business world in 2023. How do you go from being perceived as a promising entrepreneur to scamming JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world? Well, if your name is Charlie Javis, you know exactly how. She was the founder and CEO of Frank, a fintech startup that claimed to help students access financial aid and scholarships. Frank offered a platform that simplified the process of applying for federal and state aid, as well as private loans and grants. It had millions of users, hundreds of partners, and a lucrative deal with JP Morgan. But it was all a lie. Charlie approached a dodgy professor who fabricated most of the user data. The purpose of this was to artificially inflate the number of users that Frank had, and hence it would be more valuable and attract investors. Most shockingly though, she successfully deceived JP Morgan into buying her startup for $175 million, pocketing $45 million for herself in the process. At this point, she probably should have left the country, but she didn't. JP Morgan went to contact the users in the data given by Charlie. This was via email, and when JP Morgan received hardly any responses, they realized that they'd been scammed. They turned around and promptly sued Charlie. The SEC soon got involved and charged her with securities fraud, wire and bank fraud, and money laundering. She now faces a long prison sentence if convicted in her trial, which is scheduled for October 2024. As a side, JP Morgan aren't exactly clean either. They've been caught rigging the gold and silver markets for years now.
Could be facing up to 100 years in prison accused of defrauding JP Morgan Chase out of millions.
Frank kind of represented that as a name because it just meant honest.
One of the most shocking cases in the past 12 months was the collapse of Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse was one of the most prestigious and influential banks in Switzerland, with a history dating back to 1856. The bank started off as noble as a bank can be. But over time, a rot started to fester within the bank's internal culture. Fraud, funneling money for weapons to foreign governments, and general banking crimes all were just a day at the office. But by 2019, things had gotten so out of control that the CEO was caught spying on a former executive who joined the UBS bank, their main rival. Then, in 2021, Credit Suisse lost nearly $1 billion in two investment funds. The bank's chairman stepped down in 2022 amid rumours that the bank was in trouble. All of these incidents sparked panic and a massive withdrawal of clients. By the end of 2022, they'd taken out $119 billion from the bank. The situation worsened in 2023 when Credit Suisse failed to raise enough capital to stay afloat, and things just didn't get better. Two US banks, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, also collapsed around the same time, sending shockwaves through the global financial system. Basically, clients now wanted to get as far away from Credit Suisse as they could. The Swiss government had seen enough, seeing disaster on the horizon. $108 billion was granted for a merger between UBS and Credit Suisse, and this was to prevent a contagion. In March of 2023, Credit Suisse was sold to its main rival, UBS, for a paltry $3.3 billion. It was a very sorry state after a series of scandals, losses, and crises. Investors in the bank suffered huge losses as $17 billion worth of bonds issued by Credit Suisse became worthless. Employees faced uncertainty and possible layoffs, and of course, the bank's brand and reputation were trashed. Overall, Credit Suisse's downfall questioned the too-big-to-fail notion for banks and cast uncertainty on Switzerland's position as a safe global banking centre.
The ATO is blaming influencers on TikTok for promoting the scam that netted at least $1.2 billion in fake GST claims. The tax fraud went viral in mid-2021.
A seemingly harmless TikTok trend has resulted in a staggering $4.6 billion loss for Australian taxpayers. The scam exploited the Australian tax system. GST, or Goods and Services Tax, is a 10% tax that applies to most things you buy or use in Australia. If you run a business, you can register for GST and claim back the tax that you paid on your purchases. So maybe you can put two and two together and get inside how this might be exploited. The scammers took advantage of two things to pull off the scheme. They created fake businesses, going as far as creating an Australian business number, an official registration for any Australian business. Then they submitted fake statements, claiming that they spent a whole bunch of money on their businesses, and then turned around and asked the Australian government for their 10% GST refund. As soon as they got the money, they withdrew it, or moved it to other accounts before the Australian Taxation Office could catch them. The Australian Taxation Office, or ATO, is the equivalent of the IRS in the US. The scheme gained traction through TikTok, where influencers promoted it as an easy way to pocket money from the government. It's unknown if participants were oblivious to the potential consequences, like criminal prosecution, among many others, but they promoted it anyway, and many TikTokers saw dollar signs. The Australian Taxation Office first detected the fraud in early 2022 and launched an investigation called Operation Protego. This was an extensive investigation and involved 600 staff. Despite stopping $2.7 billion in fraudulent claims, the ATO had paid out $1.6 billion before halting the scammers. The scam roped in at least 56,000 participants, mostly from low-income backgrounds who were tempted by the promise of quick money. Some people actually used their real identities, while others used stolen ones. Some were even linked to outlaw motorcycle gangs, and they were promptly raided by the ATO and Australian Federal Police. Although the ATO claims to have contained the fraud, reports suggest that it might still persist but on a smaller scale. The TikTok GST scam has laid bare a vulnerability in Australia's tax system. It's reliant on self-assessment and trust, because it highlights the difference between the slowness of governments juxtaposed against the swiftness of modern social media. By the time the Australian government turned around, they'd lost over $1 billion. You've probably noticed that you've been getting more scam calls, text messages, and various phishing attempts more often recently. Why does this happen? Well, one of the main reasons is that your personal information is being sold online without you even knowing it. This information can be used for targeting for scams, unsolicited advertisements, to sell your browsing habits, or even commit identity theft. That's where today's sponsor, Incogni, can help. They can delete your information from the records of data brokers on your behalf. Simply just create an account. Then, Incogni can contact the data brokers. Then you can sit back and relax and let them take care of the rest, complete with updates on how the task is going. To protect yourself online, use the code ColdFusion in the link below to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Go to incogni.com/coldfusion to get started. Okay, now back to the video. Imagine a video game that generates so much buzz that it becomes one of the most anticipated titles of the year. But in reality, it was a colossal scam. This is the story of The Day Before, a game that promised the world but delivered virtually nothing. The Day Before was announced by its developer, Fantastic, in January of 2021. It was supposed to be an open-world, beautifully rendered MMO zombie shooter. It sounds simple enough, but a game like this has never been attempted before due to the massive technical requirements needed behind the scenes. At any given time, tens of thousands of players could be online concurrently. MMOs, or massively multiplayer online games, require robust servers and a horde of skilled developers to pull off, and that's something that this game company didn't have. The game trailer showed impressive visuals and quality, and it quickly went viral. However, something wasn't quite right. The amount of things promised and the quality of the trailers looked too good to be true, especially for a studio that had only 2 people on board. Those 2 people were Edward and Aizen Gutostov. Despite their mixed game development history, The Day Before was supposed to be their breakthrough into the big leagues. The brothers claimed that they had received assistance from volunteers all around the world, but this raised more questions than answers. As the trailers were analysed by people on the internet, they found stolen content from Call of Duty, SnowRunner, and even I Am Legend scenes were ripped off. Furthermore, the game was essentially built from stock library assets and used AI voiceovers for the trailers. But still, the majority of people were excited, but then the release date got pushed back multiple times. The day before was finally released for early access on December 7th, 2023 on Steam, a cloud platform for games. Although the initial anticipation was high, players quickly realized that they had been bamboozled. The game was plagued by frequent crashes and a barrage of bugs. It was incomplete and nothing like the trailers had promised. It was more of a shooter than a survival game, and the world was empty with pretty much nothing to do. Most of the features shown in the trailers had vanished. The gameplay was repetitive, the enemies barely functioned, and even something as basic as melee combat or hand-to-hand combat didn't even exist in the game. It was a complete disaster. As a result, the day before received some of the worst reviews ever seen in the history of Steam. There was a subsequent onslaught of refund requests. The fantastic studio faced allegations of asset dumping, trailer and gameplay plagiarism, manipulation of Steam wishlist numbers, and a reliance on unpaid volunteers. It got so bad that the studio announced its closure just 4 days after the game's launch. They deleted all their YouTube videos, their social media posts, and the game itself was no longer available for purchase on Steam. It was later revealed that Fantastic was basically a sham company. It was based in Russia, but incorporated in Singapore. It used a fake address and was set up perfectly to flee from the authorities. While the exact amount pocketed by the brothers is unknown, some estimates indicate that $3 million was injected from pre-orders. Faced with all the accusations, Fantastic's final response was crazy. It was a tweet saying, quote, "This is our first big experience. Shit happens." Some gaming commentators believe that this is the start of a new breed of scams. As I've discussed in earlier videos, due to modern game engines like Unreal Engine 5, it becomes so much easier for developers to make a AAA looking game. But, in the same breath, it also makes it easier for the scammers too. So, we'll probably be seeing more game trailers that look professional, only to be finally released as a scam game, and then they can run off with the money afterwards. If you're fleeing from your home country and want to expose the wrongdoings of your government, people are probably going to listen to what you have to say. More so, if you're a billionaire living in New York. Miles Guo, a former property tycoon who fled China in 2014, left the country after being accused of corruption and bribery. When in America, he claimed to be a dissident and a media mogul. Guo started a media platform called GTV. He claimed that it was dedicated to exposing the truth about the Chinese Communist Party. He also created a network of informal groups and recruited thousands of people to join his cause. Donating money to his projects was often asked, and he raised $1 billion this way. William Jie was a dual citizen of Hong Kong and the UK and served as Guo's right-hand man, a financier and money launderer. He helped Guo create 2 more schemes to attract investors. The first one was an online membership club, while the second was a cryptocurrency platform that allowed users to trade digital tokens linked to Guo's business. Of course, he promised large returns. Both men claimed that the money invested would be used to develop and grow their business. As you could guess, unfortunately, the money went straight to a lavish lifestyle for the duo. These were expensive properties, including a 50,000 square foot mansion in New Jersey. The rugs alone in the house cost $1 million, if you can believe it. There was also a $4.4 million Bugatti, a Lambo, a Ferrari, $1 million yachts, a $62,000 TV, and a $140,000 piano, and basically whatever these guys wanted. They would also move money around to various bank accounts, trying to hide their tracks and keep the fraud going. The scam was eventually exposed by US authorities, who seized more than $632 million from the bank accounts of both men. They also arrested and charged them with multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. They face up to 20 years in prison for each charge. Interestingly, after Guo was arrested in March of 2023, his apartment miraculously caught fire. Was this a coincidence, or was this an attempt to hide more evidence?
Fire broke out at a Chinese billionaire's penthouse just hours after his arrest.
He is charged with fraud and money laundering.
Chinese business tycoon Guo Wengui, who also goes by a half a dozen other aliases, is facing international money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud charges for allegedly soliciting more than $1 billion of investments from thousands of online victims.
We're seeing these kinds of scams in the investment space growing, and as we're seeing the economy worsen. It's really surprising to me, and it continues to surprise me, how many people are willing to provide a lot of their money to people like this man.
So there you have it. Those were some of the most notorious frauds of the past 12 months. While I've shared some ongoing cases, one can't help but wonder how many others are silently at play in the shadows. Unfortunately, preying on people's vulnerabilities has become a bit of a trend. With a faltering economy and the tantalizing promise of quick wealth, the murkier side of the financial world is flourishing. These cases show cracks in regulation globally. The scale and frequencies of these frauds highlight how hard it is for authorities to catch up. In the end, we have to keep vigilant. And as the saying goes, if an offer feels too good to be true, it probably is. So feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's keep the conversation going as we all become more aware of the shady schemes and fraudsters out there. I'll leave it to Coffeezilla.
Sometimes time feels that way. Like, is society worse than it's ever been? People will say yes. Is society better than it's ever been? People say yes. Like, I don't know. It's like always, the present feels, obviously more immediate. In recent, as long as I have been alive and noticing this stuff, it seems like 2021 and 20 was a peak. And I think we're going to get to another peak here pretty soon. With the rise of AI, I think that will be the proliferation of scams is going to shoot through the roof because the cost of scamming is going to go to zero. So traditionally, and the risk. So I don't think most people, I think most people realize AI has some serious scam risks, but I don't think they realize how much better it makes a criminal's life. I'll tell you why. One of the cases, a lot of the cases I work on, people get caught because they work with a buddy and the buddy tells on them, right? Like the buddy basically rats them out, or the buddy's not happy and they do this, or something happens. And you have to rely on other people in crime. And the problem is when you rely on other people in crime, you're usually working with criminals who are not known to be the most honorable. So, you have these risks. If I'm some call center scammer, I have to hire thousands of people, maybe hundreds, maybe even tens of people who are going to be on the phone all day for me. I have to pay those people. I have to trust those people. Now I can train this little AI bot to make tens of thousands of calls at almost no cost to me. They run the scam for me. And then, so not only has my cost gone down to zero, my risk has decreased as well because I don't have to trust anybody to get my back. And there's no paper, like who's going to tell on me? Right? I've just got this little model running.
If you want to see the full Coffeezilla interview, it was a lot of fun and we were just casually chatting. Some people even liked this Coffeezilla interview more than the Joe Rogan and Lex Fridman interviews. I kinda don't agree, but it was nice to see that people enjoyed it. Anyway, that's it from me. My name is Dagogo. If you're interested in anything on science, technology or business, feel free to subscribe to ColdFusion. My name is Dagogo and you've been watching ColdFusion, and I'll catch you again soon for the next episode. Cheers guys. Have a good one.